So here I am today on a little trail on Jones Pass, and I'm hoping that I can find some new and different flowers to share with you. We're probably at about, I'm guessing about 12,000 feet right here, definitely above timberline, and I've already heard the pikas and seen the marmots, and I already see a bunch of wildflowers. So we'll start our hike here and see what we can find. The views up on Jones Pass are always spectacular. This year it's interesting though, the wildflower blooms aren't quite as striking as they have been in past years. However, if you look close enough, there still are so many flowers hidden among the rocks and throughout the meadow. I found one right here, sheltered by a rock. This is called Alp lily, sometimes alpine lily, you might hear it referred to as. It has these white petals. There's 3 of them, but then there's also 3 white sepals. So it actually looks like it has 6 petals, but 3 of them are actually its sepals. It's a very slender plant. The leaves are grass-like. They can be up to 6 inches long. And this one you'll find pretty much only in the alpine life zone. It loves rocks and rock crevices. Sometimes you'll find it growing on gravelly ridges. Sometimes you'll find it growing alone, like this one, or you may find some clusters of them. This one's interesting because it has these purple or greenish veins on the petals that reflect ultraviolet light, and this attracts insects and other pollinating flies that will come in and pollinate once they see that. This species, the scientific name for this is Lloydia serotina, and it's the only native species of Lloydia. So make sure if you see this one, try not to disturb it, and just enjoy it growing in place. Right next to our Alp lily, we have Alpine Avens, which is this beautiful little yellow flower right here. It has these 5 bright yellow petals, and then it has 5 pointed greenish purple sepals underneath here. This one will flower from June to August, and the leaves, as you can notice, are very finely dissected. Let's see if I can find a good one to focus in on. It can grow to about 10 inches tall, and by August the plant and the leaves will start turning kind of a reddish color, so it's pretty distinguishable then as well. What's super cool about this plant is the pikas that live at this elevation will hay this plant to preserve it. And they do this because it does have toxic chemicals, but after they hay it for a while, the toxic chemicals will degrade, and then they will consume it after that. And so this is a very popular plant with our pikas. And a lot of times you can see this dotting the hillsides. All this yellow you can kind of see among the rocks is this Alpine Avens. And sometimes you might get it confused with some of the cinquefoils, some of the herbaceous cinquefoils, because it is in the same family. They're both in the Rosaceae family, the rose family. So again, if you use your guidebook, a lot of times just a few distinguishing characteristics will help you determine which plant you have. Right here we have a fleabane, or an erigeron is the genus, and we have a lot of species within this genus in Clear Creek County. And this one happens to be growing around 12,000 feet on Jones Pass. It's only about maybe 2 inches tall. A lot of the fleabane that you'll see growing in the montane or the foothills or even the subalpine areas are much taller and much showier. And so when you're trying to identify something like the fleabane, if you're interested in trying to figure out exactly what species you've got, again, using a field guide, this is the one for Clear Creek County, and I think I have maybe 6 or 7 different fleabanes in here that can help you identify exactly which one you've located. But again, this one's very unique because it's got such a short stature compared to some of our others. And other than that, a lot of times they're hard to distinguish because they have these yellow disc flowers and numerous lavender purple ray flowers that are pretty typical of all the erigerons. And so using your field guide can definitely help identify what species you have. And this one is interesting because it's growing among just a cluster of other really cool alpine plants like our cinquefoils and moss campions and mountain dryads and alpine avens. And what else do we have? We have our bistorte blowing in the wind there. We have some tall chiming bells that are not very tall here at 12,000 feet. But they are all managing to survive despite the wind conditions and the short growing season. The rocks do protect them from the wind, and the rocks also act as a heat sink, so will absorb heat from the sun and then helps keep the microclimate around the rock a bit warmer, which of course benefits the plants. See him? There goes a weasel. It's way in the distance, I don't know if you can see. Here's a cluster of Old Man on the Mountain that I just found. And this is that alpine sunflower. It's very showy. What's interesting about this is that when you find them, you'll find that they are always facing east. And that's an adaptation for these flowers to protect themselves from the strong afternoon thunderstorms that come in from the west. And so when you're on a hike, look and see. And most, if not all, of the Old Man in the Mountain flowers should be facing east. Here's another closer look at our Old Man of the Mountain facing east towards Denver. Here we have a clover growing on Jones Pass at about 12,000 feet. And we have 3 different clovers, I believe, growing in Clear Creek County at this elevation that you could see when you're out hiking. There's the alpine clover, the dwarf clover, and Perry's clover. And they all grow very small, and they do look fairly similar. I do believe this one is probably the alpine clover, just given the coloration of the flowers. Again, you can use the field guide to help you identify which clover you may have found. I just talked about the clover, and I just found another little patch of it. There's some growing right here. This is, the flowers are a little bit prettier on this one. Not quite as far along as the last patch that I showed you. You can kind of see how it covers the hillside here. I don't think I've ever seen a Picus hay pile of the alpine avens, which we have growing right here. But I just stumbled upon this, and it sure looks like that's probably what it is. It's surrounded by the plant growing here among these rocks, and it's this dry pile of what appears to be alpine avens. So that's really pretty cool. Little collection of stone crop. I can't remember if I've talked about this one or not, but it's the succulent. It's very low growing. It has these kind of reddish green leaves but it is definitely a succulent. And usually you'll find it growing in kind of dry, exposed areas, rock outcrops. And you can see this growing at much lower elevations too. It's a very adaptable species, which is kind of cool here. This one's not flowering yet, but just such a nice big clump of it right here among the Bistort, the Mountain Dryad, and the Alpine Avens. So I've come down a little bit in elevation from where I was a moment ago, looking at the Picas and the Alpine Avens. We still have some of the Alpine Avens right here, but we're in a little bit moister area, and so we're starting to pick up more of the paintbrush. And this is rosy paintbrush, and the flowers on all paintbrushes are very small. They're yellowish green and inconspicuous. They're usually hidden by large three-lobed bracts that give the paintbrush their colors. And so the rosy paintbrush, you can find it in a variety of colors, anywhere from bright red to magenta to pink to purple. I've even seen it kind of a salmon color, almost orange. Just really beautiful and diverse colors on this species. This one usually flowers all summer long, starts maybe late June, and right now we're in middle July, and so they're really starting to go now. They are on erect, unbranching stems, and they can get to about 20 inches tall. A lot of times you don't see them quite that big, but they can get to almost 2 feet. A lot of times you'll see them growing in clumps, and they love tundra slopes, hillsides, meadows, and forest openings. And you'll find these in the subalpine and alpine life zones. If you see red paintbrush a little bit lower, say the foothills up to subalpine, you're probably looking at scarlet paintbrush rather than rosy paintbrush. I've already talked about all these species, but I just had to stop and show you how beautiful they look growing together. The chiming bells, the rosy paintbrush, the cinquefoil, the Alpine Avens. Just a beautiful collection of pinks, purples, and yellows. If I could only get this to grow in my garden, I would be a happy camper. So I just turned around, and I'm still in this very marshy, boggy area on Jones Pass, and I found white marsh marigold. And this is a beautiful white flower. It's kind of bowl-shaped, and it's got 10 sepals and no petals. So what you're seeing here are actually the sepals. Let's see if I can zoom in again. And they have bluish veins, and they can get up to maybe 1.5 inches or so in diameter. And they have these glossy cordate leaves. So again, heart-shaped leaves. And they're mostly basal, and they're undivided, and they can grow up to about 3 inches in length or so. This plant can grow to maybe 1/2 foot or so, maybe a little taller in the right conditions. And you'll find this, as I said, kind of in marshy, boggy areas. It's also one that'll pop up right after snow melt or along snowbanks, snowfields. And it typically is found in large patches. So we've got a ton of it growing right in here. And this, of course, is a subalpine and alpine species. And growing right next to it is king's crown. Now there's 2 different species of rhodiola, which is the genus. There's king's crown and queen's crown. And queen's crown is also sometimes called rose crown. But what we have here is king's crown. And it's a much darker red than the queen's crown. It's more of a pinkish white. And this king's crown also likes these very boggy, wet locations. Sometimes you'll find it in gravelly areas. It likes well-drained spots. The flowers are kind of this terminal cluster of flowers. It's flat-topped, and it has these reddish petals and a 4-lobed calyx that is reddish. It flowers June to August, and so it's in full flower right now. And it's kind of a succulent looking plant. If I can get in here and you can see it, it has these alternate short leaves that are very succulent. And they're equally spaced along the stem. This one can grow to about a foot tall, and just like its neighbor, the marsh marigold, it grows subalpine to alpine life zones. And there's a huge cluster of it here intermixed with the marsh marigold. And that's rhodiola or king's crown. Here's a really tiny little plant called pygmy bitterroot, and it doesn't ever grow much taller than this, 2 inches, maybe max. It's got these reddish pink, magenta, and sometimes white flowers that are up to maybe a half an inch or maybe a little more across. And they've got 2 fleshy sepals. This one you'll find flowering kind of all summer long. The leaves are basal, and they're very fleshy, and they kind of spread out, as you can see here. This one is a perennial, so you'll see it coming back year after year. And you'll find it near snowbanks, seeps, streams, and damp forests. And right now we're kind of in a boggy area on Jones Pass, just up from the creek, and the soil's not wet, but damp. And such a small little plant, sometimes you can just miss it. But when you spy it, it's beautiful. Here's another just beautiful shot of Jones Pass. I'm just off the road. Again, probably just around 11,500 feet, just above tree line. You can see Engelmann Mountain in the distance. And we just have such a beautiful cluster of paintbrush, bistorte, cinquefoil, alpine avens, violets, sagebrush, and just a whole collection of different plants that are growing here. It's just gorgeous. Here's just another really beautiful little spot. We've got the brilliant red paintbrush, the cinquefoil, the alpine avens again. We've got bistorte all growing together. There's some more of the purplish colored paintbrush. Again, these are all the same species. They're just a variety of colors. Over here we've got some sky pilot, that real purple color, and we've also got a lot of tall chiming bells in here. Just gorgeous. It's amazing what you can just find growing along the trail or along the road. We even have a little patch of subalpine larkspur cropping up in the middle of these beautiful wildflowers. Such an amazing location for wildflower viewing. Here we have bog saxifrage. These flowers come in stalked clusters. They have 5 white, oval-ish shaped petals. And this one will flower again all summer. It likes kind of some moister locations. Just like you can see here, it's a little bit boggy and muddy. We've got the king's crown and some of the Perry's primrose and marsh marigold growing, and they all like these really wet locations, as does the bog saxifrage. It has basal leaves that are stalked, and they'll have small teeth on them. They can get up to 8 inches long. This one, again, is found subalpine and alpine. We're here on Jones Pass, and so it's really growing in abundance right here. And this one can get to about a foot tall, and I would say that's probably about how tall this one is right here. And here's one, a little bit of a more close-up of what the flowers actually look like. And that's called bog saxifrage. Right next to it is one of my favorites, just because it has such a fun name. It's called elephant's heads. And the flowers are in these dense spikes, and they're very purpley, bright purple colored. Very similar to the Perry's primrose, and they often grow together. This one has flowers that are two-lipped, with an upper lip that's long and curving, and a lower lip that's three-lobed. And when you look at it, it really does look like an elephant's head, with that little trunk sticking out. This one has leaves that are pinnately divided. Let's see if I can zoom in a little on those. And they're often purplish in color. The stems are also often purple. Again, you'll find this growing in moist grounds, along streams, and in bogs. And you can find this from alpine all the way down to montane life zones. Such a cool plant. So just a little bit ago I showed you King's Crown, which is one of the rhodiolas that we have growing here in Clear Creek County. This one here is actually the Queen's Crown, or the Rose Crown, and you can tell that it is much more pinkish white than the King's Crown. That one's just a much more dark red color. It does have that kind of same dome-shaped flowers shape, and it'll flower the same time as King's Crown, so you'll see them often growing side by side, because it does like the wet meadows and the willow bogs as well. The leaves on this one will turn orangish red in the fall, which is beautiful. And often you can see a ribbon on the underside of the leaves. I would show that to you, but I don't want to trample any plants, and I can't really get any closer than this. This one grows to about 12 inches, and again in our subalpine and alpine life zones. And here it is growing in kind of a huge area of heartleaf bittercress, Perry's primrose, and a lot of marsh marigold. And that is Queen's or Rose Crown. Here's a pretty common wildflower that you see growing along trails, in forest openings, and in meadows. You can find this plant in a lot of places. This is pussy toes, and there's several different species of it. They all are generally very low growing, mat forming, and they'll flower kind of all summer long. This one is actually just done flowering and starting to set seed. Usually their leaves are kind of a grayish green, woolly looking, and they don't get much taller than maybe 4 inches. Here's another little patch of pussy toes, and these you can definitely tell are rosy pussy toes, given the pink color on their flower heads. And sometimes you never know what you'll find when you're done with your hike. This is just at the bottom of Jones Pass, just as we're leaving. How cute are they?